Coming up on Capital Crossfire, 4 panelists join us to break down the latest flurry of action from Washington, D.C. Our experts break down everything from executive orders, cabinet confirmations, and Democratic opposition. Plus, we hear from Crossfire reporters on all things Doge.
Joining us today for our discussion, Stephen Garvey, a junior political science major, Nick Fattizzo, a junior political science major, Paul Lieb, a freshman political science student, and Jipson Zhang, a freshman political science and international affairs major.
I'm Devin.
And I'm Joan.
From the GW-TV studios in Washington, D.C.
This is Capital Crossfire.
I'm Kassidy, and I'm your moderator for this episode of Capital Crossfire. And welcome to our panelists. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Stephen, I'll give you the first question. This week saw turmoil over U.S. foreign policy over the Trump administration's negotiations with Russia over the war in Ukraine, and there is growing concern that Ukraine may be cut out of these talks together. What's behind President Trump's approach, and does it signal a shakeup in the U.S. doctrine regarding Russian relations?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me on this morning. So what we are in a situation right now is, for the past 3 years, Ukraine and Russia have been fighting. Russia has been illegally trying to obtain land in Ukraine, and it's trying to overthrow a democratic government. For the past 3 years, the U.S. has had unwavering support for Ukraine, and now we are in a sad situation in which Ukraine is, the U.S. may be changing sides with Ukraine. I know President Trump has gone back and forth on where he stands on the issue, although he has been very vocal. He does not support continuous aid, which is a very bad precedent going forward for the U.S.'s role in the world. I think it's very concerning that the talks that are ongoing right now, potentially between U.S. and Russia to form peace relations or to establish a peace plan for Ukraine, how they're talking about excluding the country that would be most affected by this, which is, it's unbelievable. The U.S. has always been a leader for promoting democracy, and it's very concerning how we don't even know what the U.S.'s position is right now, and the fact that they may be changing sides.
Nick, would you like to jump in?
Sure. I mean, I tend to agree with my panelists to the right here. I think it's a very bad precedent set to our allies around the world, wherever they may be, that our support for them is conditional on the whims of a leader. As we all know, Trump and Putin have a very interesting relationship. For some reason, the two get along. We saw that in his first term, and we're going to see that in his second term. The two are probably ideologically pretty similar, probably personally pretty similar. So, and for some reason they think the United States and Russia could be good allies. And the thing with Ukraine is newly confirmed head Sef said that it's already impossible for Ukraine to keep its 2014 borders, which is preposterous if you're trying to enact a fair negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. If you've already said, well, look, Ukraine, you're not going to get your own territory back. That's absurd. So I think it's a pretty, I'd say disgraceful thing what's happening right now, how Trump sold out Ukraine to appease his dictator friend.
Look, the matter of the fact is we have 1 million dead between the war. We spent over $100 billion in the last 4 years, and we're going to be continuously spending more. We have no economic backing. The rest of the European nations have economic backing from Ukraine. They're going to be fully paid back, and we have no guarantee. We're being pushed around in the foreign policy for the last 4 years, and I think this administration is just over with it. I think you know we also haven't backed down from Russia by any means. You know, we just want economic incentive and almost not even incentive, just assurance that we would spend this $100 billion for what? I mean, We also have engaged in multiple diplomatic engagements, yes, with Russia, but these are preliminary talks. I mean, this is the first start of it. What in the last 4 years have shown us any progression outside of what we just saw in the last month of this administration?
I mean, I would like to just add into the fact that I've heard this from, I'm blanking his name, I believe he's a professor of international relations in Johns Hopkins University. But he kind of basically outlined the fact that you can either have justice or peace. These, as it stands right now, these two options are mutually exclusive. It will be justice for Ukraine to regain its lost land from the Russian forces. However, as it stands right now, that is an impossibility. It's impossible for Ukraine to return to 2014 border unless there's some major change in the front lines. And as it stands right now, with the entrenchment of the Russian forces and the slow pace of advance by the Russian forces, it'll be an extremely expensive venture for the United States or the Ukrainian government to pursue to that end. So what's the other result? It'll be peace. And what will peace, so how will we obtain peace? Currently, we have no idea. We're currently in negotiating stage. Both sides are launching their proposals. I've seen the most recent meeting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So that's to be seen by the Trump administration. Now, I'm no expert on this. I'm just talking as myself. But it seems like there will not be a peace if the Ukrainians are not willing to give up on at least some land.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're going to start transitioning into discussing birthright citizenship. So last week, a fourth federal judge blocking President Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. How do you feel about the prospect or possibility of it coming to fruition? And what about Trump's larger immigration crackdown? Stephen, would you like to start?
So for the past, really since the Civil War, birthright citizenship has been an essential part of our country. It ensures that anyone who is born here has a right to, is automatically a citizen here. This would break really about 150 years of precedent if birthright citizenship was overturned. I assume that the Supreme Court, it would be in the best interest to hold it up, as this is just a practice that we have been following for over a century. So it is very concerning, the racism and the approach that the Trump administration is taking on this issue.
Nick, would you like to add?
Oh yeah, and I'd like to touch on the point about the broader immigration policy. I think Republicans like to, make a big distinct over quote unquote illegal immigration, but the question that they never ask themselves is, why are people willing to quote unquote illegally immigrate? It's because the legal process of immigration, where you go through the asylum system and you have to remain in Mexico, is unconscionable. There's years and years of backlogs before you would even hear your case, and there's no guarantee that you would be let in. And further into that point, I'm going to do a little history lesson here. There's no guest worker program in this country. John F. Kennedy in the 60s got rid of that program because of poor conditions, and he was justified doing so then. But what that means is that right now, you cannot come from another country, work seasonally in the United States, and then return to your country without being considered an illegal immigrant. And so I think, well, Republicans, they want to fear-mongering about, these scary non-white people are coming into your homes and whatnot. But that's simply not true. These are people who are trying to fulfill the American dream. Reagan, of all people, and don't get me started on Reagan, said one of the best defining features of America is that anyone can come from anywhere around the world and become an American. And now we see with this administration that they're going to throw that idea out the window because of the influence of nut jobs like Vivek, Elon, and the ascension of the far right. So I'm very concerned for this crackdown on immigration. I will not be surprised if we see mass deportations using the military. We've seen ICE raids in places like churches, schools, things that really assault our decencies and should for any American. So I am deeply concerned about this crackdown and like to put it out there.
I'd like to touch on something you said. You said something about reforming the asylum process, and I totally agree. I think that there's a lot wrong with our immigration process, and I also agree with you. We do need to make it easier to come into this country legally. 100% agree. However, you also said that with the Remain in Mexico policy enact that it's a bad thing, essentially, right? Now, we had last year, in this year actually, January 2025, the final days of the Biden presidency, we had 20,000 illegal immigrants at the border coming across daily in the final days. The average in December of last year was 13,000. It's down 90% within the first month of the Trump presidency, down to 359. Now, as much as you guys don't like hearing those numbers, I mean, it's ultimately good for the country. We spend so much money on whether it's housing, whether it's social programs. I mean, there's so many things we have to address for our own people, yet we're spending billions upon billions of taxpayer money on the illegal immigrants.
In regards to birthright citizenship, I think its original intent in the 1860s was to give the formerly slaves citizenship in the country as a way to justify them no longer being slaves and being citizens. But I do not believe the legislatures back then will agree on what is currently happening, which, in my opinion, is a lot of people trying to game the system. When you are a pregnant woman coming from any border, not just the southern border, legally or illegally, you have your kid in the United States, and the kid is therefore a United States citizen, and you cannot certainly deport the kid. That gives a good reason for the parent, the mother especially, to stay in the United States. And it's so, in my opinion, it is a way for people to game the system. Most people, if they want to immigrate and live in the United States, there's a proper channel to do so. It is called immigration process. I'm a first-generation Chinese-American immigrant. I know the process. It is long and arduous, but it's possible. And the process is important to make sure that we let in the people that we want, these people being people who could contribute positively upon American economy and American society. So I would say birthright citizenship, its original intent is probably not as it currently is utilized for. And personally speaking, I'm not in favor of abolishing birthright citizenship, but instead maybe amending it to prevent the loopholes that we're seeing being taken advantage of by many people coming here illegally or at times legally.
Does anyone have any final thoughts that they'd like to add before we move into the next question?
I just want to jump in on this whole topic. And last year the Republicans and Democrats wrote a bill to combat this issue and to at least form the beginnings of some type of immigration reform. It was imperfect. It needed a lot more. It needed more content to it, but it was a start, the first that we've had in decades. And who blew it up? It was Donald Trump, because Donald Trump wanted to, instead of solve the immigration issue, he wanted to run for president on an issue he's been running on for the past 10 years. So I think that just speaks to the Republican Party and specifically to Trump's goals, that it's not about solving the issues, it's about bringing him back to power, and then it's a free-for-all after that point.
So I would like to jump in if I could. It's just untrue. I mean, the bill was so vague, and it had a quota for an amount of legal immigrants that were to come in each day, and then yes, they would finally crack down after about 2 weeks or so. Now, you say that they needed this bill, they didn't. Trump has only passed the Lake and Riley Act, and the rest of them are by executive order, yet the numbers still show that it's vastly down. I mean, the fact that the president doesn't have enough power to, over 4 years, change the course of the immigration policy, it's just not true. I mean, yes, Trump won on the immigration policy 1,000% because we saw what happened in the last 4 years and where our money was going and what has happened with Lake and Riley and the rest of the individuals that were brutally murdered, unfortunately. We saw what's happening in Aurora, Colorado. I mean, this is a reality, and the fact that you guys tout this bill, that was a bunch of nothing, by the way, and you say it was imperfect. I mean, right. So how about we put a good bill forward, we put executive action from the President of the United States, and we're going to see what's going to happen over the next 4 years, and it's going to be a big different story.
And to add on to that,
I'm just going to jump in quick. I'm sorry to, just for timing, we're going to move into Trump's cabinet nominations. So while there are still ongoing confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet on Capitol Hill, his most controversial nominees have sailed through the Senate. What does this say about Senate Republicans and support for Trump's second term?
So this tells us that where the Republican Party is right now. The Republican Party is the Trump Party, whether you like it or not. They will, no matter who it is that Trump nominates, they will confirm it because they have the vote. Susan Collins, Elise Murkowski would be voting to confirm the Trump nominees. It's really goes back to, it really breaks tradition because the Senate is supposed to serve as a point of consent, advice and consent on any of the president's nominees, whether it is for executive nominees or judicial nominees. some of these nominees are highly unqualified, and these Republicans know it. Like, if you look at like Senator Bill Cassidy, he did not decide that he was going to support RFK Jr. until the last minute for Secretary of Health. And Bill Cassidy is a doctor. So these Republicans know the dangers that is going on right here. But it's the party of Trump, and they will just follow their leader.
Jipson, would you like to jump in?
Sure. So, as how I see it, besides from maybe Secretary Pete Hegseth, all the nominations, at least the majority of them, at least have had some Democratic support, even though these Democratic support might be less than maybe the Trump administration or is usually normal. And in regards to maybe perhaps more in regards to Pete Hegseth, or the more, I would say, more contentious nominations, Pete Hegseth, I could generally see that people can say he's disqualified, being only an infantryman, has made his career as a Fox News host. But in his case, I like to just add the case that the original intent of the Secretary of Defense is we're not supposed to appoint someone who is a military. Our intent was to allow a civilian have an oversight over the military, so the military cannot have any, say, political power. It's intended as original of the Secretary of Defense. And I'll argue that in the past, not just by the Republicans, not just by Democrats, but Republicans as well, they've appointed people who were formerly generals, who were formerly literally in the DOD. They only became the Secretary of Defense after they resigned, after their confirmation hearings has begun. So I would say Pete Hegseth's case, I think, is a good way to go back to the original intent of the role, which is having civilian oversight. It is good that Pete Hegseth still has some experience in the military as an infantryman, which means he may have a more, I guess, deeper connection or sympathizing role to play with the average, I guess, Joe in the military, or the GI, if you will. So I think a lot of confirmations are unusual, but I think they might be a good way to see what happens, as maybe even some of my more liberal friends might agree. The DOD is very gray. They failed audits multiple times. So having someone who's less from the system, maybe from more from outside, might be a good way to reform the DOD into something perhaps better.
Nick, would you like to jump in?
I would. I'm glad you bring up Hegseth, because that's a good point I want to touch on. I think the Democratic opposition to Hegseth isn't so much for the fact that he's not a 17-star general. It's the fact that if you look at his personal life, he's known to drink on the job, is estranged from his ex-wife, and needed his mother to go on national TV to defend him. I wouldn't trust him to run a hot dog cart, let alone our military. He's shown time and time again that he has poor judgment and his poor character. So it's not so much of the fact that he's never, for me at least, it's not so much the fact that he doesn't have this utmost military experience. So I wouldn't trust him at my job. I wouldn't trust him as my boss. I wouldn't trust him, period. And now he's running around controlling millions of ground troops and advanced military arsenals. But to touch back on the larger point of the Senate, I mean, it's as Stephen said, it's clear it's a party of Trump. All 50 have kissed the ring, and they're going to continue to do so unless they want to get a nice far-right primary challenge. That's what Bill Cassidy did. He probably will get primaried, even just for wavering on support of RFK. Same thing with Susan Collins. She's had an election in 26. She'll want the RNC's money. She's on a play along. So, I'm really not surprised that all the Senate Republicans laid down and, acquiesced. And just one more point. You mentioned that, some of these nominees are getting Democrat support. As a native son of Pennsylvania, I would hardly call John Fetterman a Democrat anymore.
We'll start with you, Paul, with the next question after our break. All right, there will be more to come with our panel later on. And for now, let's take a quick break and turn to our reporting on the latest federal agency impacts from Elon Musk's Doge.
Since the start of the second Trump administration, the White House has said that cutting government waste and improving efficiency is a top priority. Leading this effort is the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, headed by Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies. But what actually is DOGE? President Trump officially created DOGE through an executive order he signed on his first day in office, housing it within the executive branch rather than creating it as an outside advisory committee, which would require an act of Congress. DOGE's purpose, as stated in the executive order, is to, quote, implement the president's DOGE agenda by modernizing federal technology and software to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity. So far, Doge has cut over 1,000 federal contracts, $6.5 billion from USAID, as well as hundreds of millions of dollars from the Department of Education, Social Security Administration, and other government agencies. These cuts have created great divides among Democrats, Republicans, and the American people. The most notable controversy has to do with the USAID, or the United States Agency for International Development, the government's agency responsible for administering foreign aid and development assistance. Earlier, Trump and Musk deemed the agency to be wasteful, with the president issuing a funding freeze in his first day in office. Experts quickly criticized the decision, saying that this freeze will cause damage to the agency's aid work done around the globe and that extensive investments will have to be made to rebuild. Republicans backed the administration's actions, with House Speaker Mike Johnson saying that the president is, quote, taking legitimate executive action to root out waste. On the other side of the aisle, Democratic members of Congress criticized the freeze in a letter they wrote to the president, saying, quote, the repercussions of these actions will be felt in the form of increased maternal and child mortality, reduced access to education, economic hardship, and heightened vulnerabilities to gender-based violence and exploitation of women. Democratic leaders were then joined by protesters outside of USAID's headquarters in Washington, D.C. to protest the funding freeze and shutting down of the agency. This protest was the first in a series of protests aimed at stopping Doge's interference in different agencies across the government. Protesters and members of Congress gathered at the Department of Education, the Treasury, and the Capitol building, hoping to limit Musk's and Doge's access to the government. Apart from protests, there have also been lots of legal action taken against the Trump administration, claiming that most of what Doge is doing is illegal. There are at least 11 lawsuits against Doge and its level of access to government data, and 14 states have sued the Trump administration, saying he does not have the legal authority to implement these spending cuts and freezes, as well as just create or destroy agencies. On top of lawsuits, there have also been questions into the competency of Doge, as many of the employees seem to be inexperienced, with some staffers being as young as 19 years old. Earlier this month, as part of budget cuts, some staff who oversee our nuclear stockpile at the National Nuclear Security Administration were fired accidentally, and now the White House is saying that they are struggling to rehire them as they do not know how to contact them. Makers, legal challenges, and public protests show no signs of slowing down. With billions in cuts already made and more expected, the debate over government efficiency versus essential services is far from over. The coming months will reveal whether Doge is a bold step toward modernization or a costly experiment in overreach. For now, the nation watches as the Trump administration and Elon Musk push forward with their highly ambitious and highly controversial agenda. For GWTV's Capital Crossfire, I'm Devin Gilbert.
2, 1.
And with that, let's turn back to our panelists. Speaking of Doge, the agency has taken unprecedented actions to reshape federal agencies, which has led to mass firings, layoffs, and concerns about private access to private data from millions of Americans. Do you believe Doge's actions will have negative consequences for everyday Americans? Paul, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons Donald Trump got elected is because of major government reform and cutting out the waste in the U.S. government, right? And so far, we have about $100 billion in savings from Doge. Along with that, we have real-time auditing and identity verification and technology to prevent fraud even before it happens, which has been a long issue in the United States. Now we also have a very big waste spending problem with improper payments in the United States. 2 years ago, September, $150 billion was unaccounted for improper payments, fraud, underpayments, duplicate payments, and ineligible recipients. We have $150 billion. I mean, that's the things that we could do with this money. And that's just in one category, right? I feel like we can all agree that cutting spending in certain areas where it's pure fraud and pure misuse should obviously go to bigger and better things. We also have funding for expired programs. Congress allocated $516 billion in appropriations for nearly 500 programs with expired authorizations in the current fiscal year.
I'm just going to say, so the problem with Doge is what you need is government. People who are in government are supposed to understand how government operates. And Elon Musk clearly does not know how a government is supposed to work. A government is meant to provide for its citizens, even just basic requirements. Now, what Republicans are not going to tell you what is being cut out of Doge is funding for 9/11 cancer research, which I'm a New Yorker, and that means a lot to New Yorkers. Like that, there are many people who are affected from 9/11, and they need the funding to develop cancer research. They're also not telling you that they're cutting FAA spending, or they might be, but they'll blame it on DEI. But the truth is air traffic controllers, they're in a crisis right now. This has been a long-standing issue, and they will be, and they need more air traffic controllers. And cutting funding and cutting employees is not going to solve an issue where people are dying. Planes are going down because of this.
I just want to jump in, but you guys can speak in a second. I think it's absolutely terrible that you just blame the Trump administration for that. I mean, come on, these are victims. We've seen multiple over the past month, and you're going to tell me it's because of FAA spending, a little bit of a cut. I think that's absolutely ridiculous, preposterous, and that's seriously a misjudgment. I mean, please, this is ridiculous.
My point on that is that it's not helping the situation. This is a long-standing issue, the FAA.
But you
just
said
that's not what I said.
It's 100%.
That is not what I said.
Okay.
What I said was that that this has to be an issue that has to be dealt with, and cutting spending is just going to make it worse. That's the point I'm trying to make.
And you didn't address the $150 billion in misjudged funds. What was about? Nothing on that. That's okay. I just want to get that out there.
No, my point is that
Okay.
what you need is who you want running the government is you want someone who understands how government operates, and just blatantly cutting spending maybe there's ways, I don't know, but the point is you need someone who's managing your government to know how government works and what is actually needed.
And
Now I think.
apologies,
all
please
right.
go ahead.
I'll be quick. Now I think the bigger issue here is with Doge is they're doing what they're doing under the guise of, we need to cut spending. And look, there are definitely areas in the federal government where you can cut spending. I'll start. How about the Defense Department with a $900 billion budget who's failed 6 audits in a row, where we're getting greedy contractors are charging us $5,000 for a wrench for crying out loud, or the $2 trillion F-35 program that's a complete waste of money. Or how about this, the billions of dollars we send so Israel can bomb Palestinian civilians. All right, look, there are plenty of ways that you can save money if that's what you're serious about. But it's not about that. You're going after the Consumer Finance Protection Board because Donald Trump took millions of campaign contributions from big banks, and heavens forbid banks couldn't charge people overdraft fees. He's cutting it from the nuclear technicians who maintain the upkeep of our warheads. I don't know, that could be kind of important. He's cutting it from cancer research, from 9/11 victims funds. If Elon Musk was serious about cutting federal spending, he would maybe take a look at his ridiculous SpaceX contracts that are draining us billions of dollars while we have NASA. But my point is, it's not about spending. It's about enacting his priorities under the guise, because he knows that the idea of cutting the fat sounds appealing, when really, truly, he's doing it to advance his own interests of the oligarchy.
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to jump in regards to, I think, an earlier statement regarding how Elon Musk is a businessman. He's not exactly a government official and doesn't really have to know how to handle government affairs. I'd like just to say that, how do we know if government officials know how to handle government budgets? We know a lot of city councils, they hire city managers. These people are unelected people, bureaucrats, if you will, and they manage the city like companies, if you will. And in a lot of cities, and this is happening in a lot of cities and towns because it works. And what we're seeing with the United States government is that there are funds unaccounted for. So we're trying to bring a separate way to see if we can fix this thing. I believe the Trump administration, his first Trump administration back in 2016, tried doing this, but it wasn't that successful. Now he's trying something new. God help him if it's successful, and God help us if it's not. But in regards to cutting funding for other projects such as our military spending, I like to say that in terms of foreign policy, I think most people in the Washington foreign policy circle would disagree with the fact that we can't cut any foreign military spending right now. I believe some people agree that our current objective as the United States military is to deter China until 2027, because that's when the Chinese military, when the Chinese general staff, if you will tell Xi Jinping that that's when the Chinese military is ready to invade Taiwan. If you cut military spending now, what that indicate, they'll indicate American weakness, ultimately will allow Xi Jinping to press the button and go invade Taiwan. And if that happens, God forbid, that might be World War III and it'd be all over for us. In regards to stuff that might be a $5,000 wrench, I've heard this argument times and times again. Why are we paying so much money for things as basic as a screw or a wrench? Well, the truth is, in screw on the F-35, I believe it costs around $80. a low screw. It sounds ridiculous, but the truth is each one of these individual screws goes into extensive testing to make sure they can sustain the stress that are imposed upon them while in flight. Now, it is, at least in the thought of military planners and generals who allocate these contracts, it is better to have a screw that costs $80 and make sure this screw does not fail than lose a potentially $300 million aircraft because of a failed screw. Now, we can criticize the military-industrial complex all I want, but I believe that it is too much of an oversight on our part to just say, oh man, the military defense industry is ripping us off, and these people are corrupt. I think it's a lot more complex than just that. I believe these industries have survived for so long, have come in scrutiny for so long as well. These companies eventually came on top, and we're seeing competition such from the Andrew crowds. So in terms of this, I think it's too lazy of us if you just say that, oh, let's just cut military spending. Let's just make sure that Lockheed Martin or something doesn't have an F-35 program. By the way, F-35 program was a great program, by the way. One of the most cost-effective 5th generation fighter jets.
We're going to start transitioning into our next question. So in the wake of the Trump administration's flurry of executive action, there's been growing concern from Democratic voters that the Democratic Party is not acting in strong enough opposition to Trump and Republicans. Congressional approval for Democrats sits at a low 28%. What should Democrats be doing differently? Stephen, would you like to start?
So I think the Democratic Party, one of our big issues is that we have lost touch with many voters around the country. For a variety of reasons, that there are certain issues that we, during the last election, did not address to as much of an extent as we should have, such as inflation. I think that how it's set up right now is that the Democratic Party is in a weak position in terms of that we don't have the presidency and we're in the minority in the House and Senate. The Democrats have a strategy that they are working on to address the flurry of executive orders and the issues that the Trump administration is creating. But the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump and Mike Johnson and John Thune are the ones who really have the power here, and it's up to them to set the agenda, and we will work with them if it is feasible. But there is a lot of extremism going on that we just simply, it's just not in the best interest of the country for us to get involved with. So I would urge that Democratic leaders that they stand tough and be ready to fight when the time allows.
Well, Stephen, I'm afraid I have to split you here a little bit. I don't really think that it's going to be in the best interest of Democrats to just put their hands and be like, well, we're not in power, what do you want us to do? What kind of message is that? The reason why the Democrats just broadly have been struggling is because we don't stand for anything. We're willing to be wishy-washy and, not pass our agenda. Because, for example, if like abortion, yeah, we could codify Roe v. Wade, but then what the hell are we going to campaign on? It's that kind of structuralized incompetency that's made the Democratic Party somehow the party that's lost to a 78-year-old convicted felon. And so because of that, I am very much of the view that Democrats should be doing more, and that, when Hakeem Jeffries holds a press conference and says, well, let's have Jesus take the wheel, I think that's very disappointing. That's not what people want to see right now. That's not what Democrats want to see. Democrats are rightfully angry and scared right now because they're seeing their country being hijacked by oligarchs, Elon Musk, and proto-fascist. And to just hear our elected leaders go, well, what do you want us to do about it, is very disappointing. So I look forward to, I can't believe I don't say this, but Kathy Hochul is doing something right, because she recently refused an extradition request to comply with the Louisiana state abortion law. That's the kind of things we should be doing. There should not be these, it should not be Democrat policy to roll over and hide in our shells and wait till the midterms. We have to be resisting, because while we're all sitting in our corporate-sponsored lounges and taking campaign contributions from everyone's favorite interest groups, people are suffering. So I'm very disappointed in our resistance, but I'm not surprised.
I think that.
Paul, would you like to jump in first?
Yeah, I think, as you can see, that there's a big split in the Democrat Party, as we saw in the last election as well. They have an identity problem. First off, their bench is terrible. It's true.
I agree with you.
The bench is terrible. They have an identity problem. They don't know where to run. Right? This is the first time where we've seen the Democratic Party in a long time where they don't really have a course of direction. And like I said, you could see this. They don't have any power in Congress, realistically, and they don't have any power in the executive. And I mean, this was a mandate from the American people. I think we saw from the last 4 years what we were given, and obviously the American people did not like it by any means, and they gave us the overwhelming mandate for this administration to reform, readjust, and get us back on track.
And to add on to that, I believe the Democratic Party, in regards to they don't really have a benches. I believe in the last 8-9 years, the Democratic Party has branded themselves as a party of anti-Trump. You know, that might work. It worked certainly for Goldwater's campaign in 1964, but the American people, obviously, that's no longer working for them. Just because you're anti-Trump doesn't mean that you're going to win the elections anymore. Because as Paul earlier said, the American people voted for Donald Trump. Three branches of government all went Republican, and just two branches just all went Republican. I'll just say that. Apologies, a bit sick. But I'll just say that if the Democrats do want to reform and do better, they better, do some soul searching, find their platform. Is it the culture war? Currently, I believe the Democrats are losing the culture war. What about their economic stances? Well, it seems like the Republicans have rebranded themselves as a party of workers. Even though the labor unions all endorse Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for president, however, I cannot tell you the source right now, but I read it somewhere that around 80 to 85% of union laborers in the last election actually voted in favor of Trump and the Republican Party. So you do see this huge disconnect between Democratic people and the people that they're supposed to represent. Now they just seems like the party of the coastal elites, the suburban moms and dads, not the people that they're supposed to represent, which is a working class. So if the Democrats are to succeed, they better find a new constituency because there's certainly lots of minority vote, especially, just look at Miami, one of the largest Hispanic communities and countries, and they voted, for Republican. So they got to do some soul searching for finding a new constituency, especially find a new topic they want to fight Republicans on, which, I consider myself generally conservative Republican. I don't think that's for me to say which platform they should be fighting Republicans on. In regards to can they fight against Trump, and is Hakeem Jeffrey just giving up entirely? I will argue for the last 8-9 years, that's all they've been doing. I think they need to be doing more, frankly, to be fighting Republicans if they want to succeed. They have to appeal to the American people that, like, hey, we're not just a party of anti-Republican or anti-Trump, but we're a party of something different. Perhaps another Obama figure will emerge. But hey, that's something the Democrats have figured out, and that's not for me to say what that would be like.
Thank you. We're going to shift into our next question now. On February 12th, the Kennedy Center's board unanimously voted to elect President Trump to serve as its new chair, and he replaced the rest of the board. How will this impact the arts community, and what does this say about Trump's larger presence in American culture? Stephen, would you like to start?
Yes. The truth behind this is it's a distraction from the embarrassments of the Trump administration. There is a lot of issues with DOGE and with other controversies in the Trump administration, and the embarrassing of not knowing how to write a spending bill on Capitol Hill, that this is the issue that the president would like to take on. The president does have the power to appoint a board of trustees at the Kennedy Center, but this has historically been a bipartisan thing. So for him just to fire everyone and put his own people in and to install him as chair, I guess being president, he has a lot of free time on his hands if he has time to be president of the Kennedy Center. There's a lot of performers who said they will not be performing there anymore in protest of this blatant distraction.
Nick, would you like to add?
Certainly. I agree with you, this distraction. This is just another furtherance of their culture wars, which Republicans have waged so well, and Democrats have been foolish to play into. This is a political debate show. Instead of talking about the fact that the middle class is collapsing or there's war around the world, we're talking about the Kennedy Center, for crying out loud. So it's obviously bad that Trump appointed himself. It's an abuse of power, it's an abuse of precedent, and now my student deal might be nits. That's probably the worst part. But it's bad for artistic expression. It's an ego thing. This is what he does time and time again. Same thing with the whole renaming the Gulf of Mexico and the Mount Denali. he's doing it because he can, and he likes to put himself out there and be, I'm Mr. Macho Man, I can do this, and the silly libs can't do anything about it. So, just another one of those things. It's not that important to me.
Paul, do you want to respond?
Sure. I mean, there is reason for it. I understand that it's not a hot button issue. Now, we have given about $70 million in federal grants to the Kennedy Center, and year in and year out, they're in a deficit. We gave them $20 million throughout the CARES Act, which President Trump did pass in 2020, but they again filed for a deficit that year, over $1 million, and they continued to lay off people. So they're laying off people with jobs, and the quality that they're putting out at the Kennedy Center has been increasingly going down. And it obviously does not align with what this administration wants to put forth.
I mean, in regards to, I think, what earlier Nick was talking about, I mean, it's the Kennedy Center renaming. It's honestly, in my opinion, we probably will forget about this by the end of the year. I mean, it's such a DC issue. I guess we're in DC, we're talking about it, but on a grand scheme of things, is a renaming going to affect much of the American public? No, maybe people in Northern Virginia, Maryland, and DC, and that's it. And in regards to quality of performances, I think this is a larger fight on the side of the Trump administration and the Republican general against prevalence culture war. And if that's a way for them to fight, so be it. If that's the way they want to fight. But honestly, it's not that huge of an issue. But in regards to what Paul said about $70 million deficit, I actually never knew that. I went to many performances hosted by the Kennedy Center, and some of them are quite expensive, like an opera costing $300 for a ticket. That's kind of crazy considering at many other cities, small cities, just on the Northeast, an opera might cost maybe less than $100. So how much I'm paying for it and how much they're still in deficit. I mean, that's, personally kind of crazy to me. That's the first time I'm hearing it.
Does anyone have any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Can I make a general statement, or does it have to be?
Oh, if you'd like to, sure.
Yeah, I think we've heard a very good discourse. I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you, Jipson, as well. Thank everyone on the crew. I think we had a great discussion. I think we were broad-ranging, and clearly there's a divide in America, which I think over time will heal. And this administration's view on things is, yes, it is one way, but the way that I believe that he's trying to go is towards the common sense that we've seen him try to convey over the last now 2 administrations that he's had. Right? The way we come together is through success. We've seen it in the past. We will see it over the next 4 years.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. And thank you again to all of our panelists for being in studio for such a lively discussion. And thank you all so much for joining us from home.
Dismal year with the Flyers. Andrei Svechnikov makes his return this season.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, that's all for this episode of Capital Crossfire. Earlier, one of our panelists claimed that 80 to 85% of union workers favor Trump in the 2024 election. According to an exit survey conducted by VoteCast, union workers favored Harris by 16 points over Donald Trump.
Be sure to check us out online at www.gwtv.com and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at GW Capital Crossfire.
For all of us at GWTV, I'm Devin.
And I'm Joan.
Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us.
We'll see you back here next time.